All right, everyone. Good morning. This is Dennis Misigoy, Libertarian for the U.S. Senate here in the state of Florida, with another Thursday live stream. Got it back in the morning today, working around other things, but you guys know how it goes. Here to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. If you guys have certain things you want to talk about, or just talk about what's going on, either which way. Talk a little bit also with what goes on with the campaign, which, as you guys know, is always a challenge when you're running third party, when you're running outside of the establishment system. But here's where we are. We've already, if you missed last time or if you hadn't caught up on the news, the biggest thing is obviously that we qualified. As of last week, it's official that we're going to be on the ballot across the state this November. So that is, again, the first big milestone for us, the first big hurdle overcome, and now we focus on trying to get this message out to everybody, and that's part of what I try to do here by streaming and creating a little bit of information and get myself out here so that you guys, everybody who has a question, who wants to hear, or just has an opportunity, wants to hear what certain candidates have to say. I want to make sure that I'm not one of these guys who you just can't find anything. I've noticed there's a couple other, I've noticed both big party and nonpartisan candidates for this same office who've got their websites, they've got this, that thing up, but when you go there, you don't see any policy and you don't see any information about it. And I want to make sure that that's a big, clear distinction between them and me. I'm proud of the policies I stand for and what I intend to do if elected. So that's why I'm happy and proud to come out and do this kind of live streaming and make myself as accessible as I can, because I do believe in these principles, and there is a clear distinction that I want to make sure is understood by everyone out there who will be voting this November, so that you take those things into consideration. For me, one of the most obvious ones is going to be, let's say two shots at it. Number one is an issue I think affecting just about every one of us, is inflation. Now, what can we say that's not already well enough understood in terms of the impact? Every one of us is feeling the pinch. Every regular person who has to budget their resources and maybe, hopefully, if you're lucky, be able to save a little bit. But, the day-to-day costs of just getting around, gas prices have pretty much doubled from this time last year. Certainly from the beginning of last year, the after effect of what has been done, and there really is no excuse for it. And it's interesting, something I've really noticed over the what I've observed has been for both the Democrats and the Republicans to provide cover in their own different ways for the irresponsible monetary policy that we've gotten over the last couple of years in particular, and really what we've had in place for more than a century now from the Federal Reserve. You hear Democrats are blaming it all on corporate greed. It's all these big bad companies that suddenly got greedy in the last year or so. They weren't greedy 2 or 3 years ago, but they're greedy now, and that's the reason why we have inflation. I was looking at Marco Rubio, our esteemed incumbent senator, and he was just talking about gas prices. They can't bring gas prices down because of all of the climate radicals who don't want to allow more domestic fuel production. And look, I'm not against expanding, or I shouldn't say expanding, but allowing the domestic production of fuel and other energy resources to be increased. I don't think government should be managing those things. It's not the proper role of government to dictate how much energy needs to be produced. But that isn't the reason why. It's not a disruption in the fuel supply and the energy supply. That's not the reason why gas prices have close to doubled, or have over doubled, actually, I should say, in the last 18 months or so. The reason for it is because the dollar has lost its value, because it's been so screwed up because of the creation of all this new money from the Federal Reserve. And this is functionally a tax on the American people. You have central government policy that has now deprived the people of their wealth, decisions at the top. Now we pay more, we have less however you want to look at it, whether you're looking at it in terms of raw numbers of what we're spending, or when you're talking about the volume of wealth that we have in the dollars that we have. Our wealth has been reduced, us, the regular American people, and who got it? Where did it go? We know where it went. It went to the people who got the new dollars as the Fed was doling stuff out through all these government programs and whatnot, and obviously to fill in the gaps in the budget, because we simply cannot have a balanced budget in this country. So that is in addition to why we're in this situation and why so much of our wealth is being taken away. It is functionally a tax, the inflation tax, and there's no other candidate in this race who has any sort of wants to even call it out at this point, really. Nobody wants to make the point about the Federal Reserve and the monetary system. And really, what I think is the only real escape hatch we have is to start allowing a real free market in currencies, get away from this notion that all of us were raised with, which is that within a given nation, there is one currency, it's issued by government or some government-adjacent central bank. We got to get away from that. We need to get away from that idea and instead embrace the idea that the market can choose better, that allowing people to choose what they've put their confidence in will bring us greater efficiency. The same way that it works in every other aspect, it will make that possible. And so that's a clear distinction between me and the others. They are not going to address the cause of this. They are going to play it off on a million other factors, but the reality is that creating trillions of dollars inevitably affects the value of the dollar, and that is what has really created the change in prices that we've observed and the challenges that we're all facing as people. And we need to draw the line in the sand and not allow it any further. So we got a question here: where do progressives and libertarians disagree on economics? I think really the core fundamentals of how an economy should be organized. Libertarians believe in freedom. Obviously, liberty is in the name, and that's really at the core, even though that's also classic liberalism. But what is called liberalism today tends to more, I guess, reflect the idea of giving things liberally, I suppose. But the question is really, how should an economy be organized? And that is a question of whether it should be, you have sort of central economic planning and what we get into, the further down the line you want to go, calling it socialism, of whether government actually directly controls these things, or you have quote-unquote collective ownership of the means of production and economy, versus, like I say, a free market where you have, in particular, respect for private property rights, where individuals or groups of individuals privately own certain things, and they are allowed to operate freely without government restrictions to deliver goods and services in the most efficient way. A really good way, I think, of understanding it, if you have the opportunity, go either read or you can listen to the audiobook because you can actually find this for free on YouTube, the audiobook of Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. He describes it as a price-coordinated economy, is a term I think he uses quite a bit in there, which is basically information in an economy. In a free market, information is transmitted through, how prices going up and down, or profits and losses in companies. All of these aren't just numbers or people getting money. It is information because it guides decisions, and it does it in a way that isn't encumbered by the sort of red tape and bureaucracy that you have in a centrally managed economy. Because if somebody says, how does a central bureaucrat know that we need to increase production of this or decrease production of this because it's not selling or because people just don't want it? The way that has to happen, you have to have people identifying this need in a very what's the word I'm looking for? In a sort of I don't want to just say inefficient, but a sort of like red tape, sort of office procedural way of identifying this issue where there's a real change in something. Then they have to probably write up certain kinds of reports, present this information to decision makers higher above them, to other bureaucrats, and then everybody there needs to kind of sign off on it and decide, oh yes, well, we need to change this and we need to change that. And we're hoping that they get it right, and we're hoping that they're responsive to it. And instead, what we want to have to be able to do it in the most efficient way is you allow prices to coordinate this. So if people aren't buying something and it's just sitting on the shelves, that is going to send a signal in a way that you don't need a whole bunch of bureaucrats going through red tape to figure out that this isn't working, or that you need a better product, or you need to sell it at a lower price. Those things are done. Those things are done sort of automatically or intuitively because of the information that's transmitted in that way. But I think the key point is that freedom works best, and that works best in the economy. It works best in our personal lives. It works best in our interpersonal relationships. And so from an economic standpoint, it is that you don't want to have government deciding really much of anything about, I can't really think of a proper role. When I talk about the proper role of government, in as much as there is one, obviously I know some folks will disagree on it, but being very much a minarchist, I do believe there's a proper role for government, but that it is to uphold individual rights to life, liberty, and property. The property obviously being probably the most relevant here, but as long as we're making sure that people aren't being stolen from, that they're not being defrauded out of their property, that contracts are being enforced, beyond that point, we really should be able to allow the people to operate freely. There's a whole lot of good quotes and information also from other folks who've really studied this thing over long periods of time, and even way back in the past, at the same time that this country was being founded, back in 1776. You have The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, where he talks about, again, trying to understand the reasons, what is it that makes a nation wealthy. And one of those quotes that I like, and I'm probably going to paraphrase it because I don't have it memorized, but what is it? It always is and must be in the interest of the great body of the people to buy whatever it is they want from whoever sells it cheapest. And he basically says that this is such an obvious thing that it really would never have been called into question, and you would never have to take time to try to prove it if it weren't the fact that you had special interests that had worked so hard to try to confuse this thing, which is what we kind of see, where you have a particular industry that complains that maybe they're being outbid or outsold by maybe foreign companies in the same industry or whatever that may be. But at the end of the day, they fight for protections from government, you get government interference in the market. Government protects this industry, and people get convinced that we need to do this because we need to, this sort of mythical idea in some points, and this is not a uniquely progressive thing. You'll hear this from conservatives as well, where they kind of want to have this sort of self-contained economy where we can produce everything here. But why should we produce everything here if it's not the most efficient way to do it? Ultimately, you want to have as efficient economy as possible, and the reason for that is because, look, if I can get the same goods and services I need to get through life, spending, $7 instead of $10, that's $3 more that I have that I wouldn't have had otherwise, even though I've received all the same benefits. And that means that that's $3 more that I can spend on something else I like. I can invest it into something else. I can do all these other things, but I can only do that if I'm not spending that money on other things. The more efficiently we can deliver goods and services, the better we can improve people's lives. And it's how we have, in general, improved people's lives. How people's lives have become improved over time. Technology has been a big part of it, but we see where government tries to get in the way and try to limit that in different areas. Government setting controls on prices, including the price of labor when you talk about minimum wages and things of that nature, which ultimately cause a great deal of harm further down the line as well. But this is in a broad sense. I'm speaking very broadly, so because I think the disagreements between us and self-identified progressives on this topic are pretty vast, because at the end of the day, we reject the idea that you want to have government really meddling in the economy and guiding the economy. We don't think the people in government have any clue what would be best for the economy and how how best it should be run. So why would we put these people in charge of it? Why would we give them final say to determine where resources should be invested? Everything that government has and spends is extracted from the free market economy, from productive sources, and redirected to things that generally tend to not be productive, things that people don't actually want to spend, that people aren't willing to voluntarily spend on. And so it is worth really understanding that difference. And again, if you appreciate liberty and you want to see a more efficient economy that delivers you better goods and services at lower prices, really libertarianism is the only way that fits that. So I got a message here. Let me see the Lacey Act. Let me check this link out. Follow link. Let me see if I've had a chance. Environment and Public Works. I have not had a chance to look at this one. I got a question from from Matthew. Let me take a look at this one. I don't think I have this one off the top of my head, so I'm taking a look at it now. Bill author, Department of Interior, emergent designation prohibiting the importation of a species if necessary to address an imminent threat to human beings, to the interest of agriculture, horticulture. Prohibition of importation of any non-native species. Again, I think this sort of thing. Prohibiting, let's see, injurious wildlife provisions of the Lacey Act, which generally prohibits the import. Prohibition applies to interstate shipments within the continental United States. Again, ideally, as I've said, we would like to have as free trade and free commerce as possible. I think that would include as it relates to livestock. Now, certainly some folks will take issue with what's the word I'm looking? I guess where we have sort of dangers or views on invasive species and some of the negative impacts that can have. I think some of that might be a little bit overstated, but regardless, in terms of on principle of what we should be doing here, really, rather than trying to issue blanket prohibitions, really should be just a return to liability, where again, if folks are known to be doing this stuff, where they can be held liable if there are damages. But we shouldn't be prohibiting people from engaging in activity such as this, whereas it is not discernibly inherently violating anyone else's rights. I mean, that's one of the easy things about where I approach things on principle as a libertarian, is that it all really boils down to, does any of these actions violate discernible individual rights, life, liberty, property? Now, certainly if you do bring an invasive species and it does actually create damage, particularly as it mentions here in like agriculture sort of area, destroying crops or actually causing physical harm to anyone or destroying property, that's stuff where somebody should actually be held liable for it directly, and that makes all the sense in the world. But where that hasn't happened, if someone actually is being responsible with the importation of exotic creatures or whatever, they should not be by default subject to government penalties and the like to be able to intervene directly. That'd be great, Matthew. I'd be interested in taking a look at that a little bit more. But yeah, this isn't one I've followed up on, so definitely something I will step in and take a look at. And I definitely think that there's again, we'll see how much opportunity we can with regards to this. But again, it's more of and again, this sort of legislation in general deals with government intervening to control, again, commerce and market activity in the area of livestock, in the area of exotic creatures. So So, but I definitely would be interested in seeing a little bit more of that. So, thank you for bringing that to bringing that one forward to me, so we can take a little bit of a look at that and again make that a discussion point. It's not one of the things that is usually sort of at the forefront of my mind, but it's certainly not something we necessarily want to ignore either, because just like anything else we talk about, when government creates these sort of rules, it has a real impact on people's lives. People get arrested and fined, and all sort of destruction happens because we insist on having government intervene in all these sort of various ways ahead of there being any real violation of rights, to be certain, and where there is not going to be a violation of rights, because you do have people who are willing to be responsible. Speaking of things that are typically on the forefront of my agenda, one of those is sort of the anti-war message. When I was out at the Orange County meeting Tuesday night, this was one of those things where I harped on a little bit for people who will listen to me. If you guys aren't already aware, there is a resolution, and you haven't already seen. I know I made some social media posts about it, but I don't know if I've made it on every platform. Regarding there's a war powers resolution that's out there regarding U.S. support for Saudi Arabia in Yemen, genocide. So that's one of those things that we don't want to continue. So there is a number you guys can call, 833-STOP-WAR, which will connect you to currently seated representatives representing you in Washington, D.C., and to be able to demand that they support this resolution, and also, if possible, I shouldn't say also if possible, you should be demanding definitely that they also remove the word offensive from this sort of qualification of what the U.S. can do, because there is an expectation and been some discussion about how much teeth this resolution will have, based on the fact that there is some of this language that seems like it's going to allow them to sort of the powers that be, that even if this were to get passed, that they can still work around it and just claim that all of our support for Saudi Arabia committing genocide, obviously, is, of course, defensive, which makes absolutely no sense. But it's the greatest humanitarian crisis, going on right now, and worth noting that at the same time that this is going on, we also have the fact that Biden recently sent in U.S. troops in there to go help out the Saudis. So we actually have U.S. troops on the ground in Yemen as of the last couple of weeks, which Biden informed the Congress of, and I believe is even basing this off of the 2001 authorization for the use of military force against Al-Qaeda for 9/11, even though we're on the side of Al-Qaeda in Yemen primarily. So because they're on the side with Saudi Arabia against the Houthis and Iran by extension. So it is. But one of the things I point out to people, and one of the things why I think it's so important to, even if we could get those resolutions passed, and even if the president signed it and just decided to ignore it later, part of the reason why it's so important to not just accept that, but to remove these folks and to elect folks like Joe Hanush here and myself, who are running for federal office, is the fact that even no matter what they do with this resolution, in as much as they decide to continue military operations there, all of these people, or most of these people who were pressured by activists into supporting these resolutions, are still going to vote for these military budgets that are out of control. More than $750 billion now. They're looking at more than 4/5 of a trillion for the next one, over $800 billion. And, the only way it's going to change, the only way it's going to stop enabling this this insanity is by changing out the folks who are there. That's the only thing that's going to happen. So it's what we need to spread this message. We need to be able to allow people to understand that even when they get worked up and they say about getting us out of these wars, we keep enabling the war machine because we keep feeding it, we keep rewarding it, and we keep giving it more and more of our resources. And so that's not going to stop unless we make it stop by re-electing the folks who keep doing that. And that is both of them. That is both Marco Rubio and Val Demings. And Val is probably going to be the Democratic nominee. She does have a few people in there who are going to be in a primary with her come August, but I fully expect that she's going to be the one who comes out of that. So we will see. Yes, don't vote for warmongers. We're talking about, yes, really insane amounts of money being thrown at this, and that will continue because they're going to continue because we're not, again, because us as a voting electorate have continued to allow them to stay in power. So why would they change? There's no impetus for them to change. So it's on us to step up and provide the alternative, and for folks to hopefully choose us once they understand what it is we stand for and really what the difference is and how stark that difference is. Because I don't know how far away the breaking point is, but how much longer can we wait? 30 trillion in debt, 8.5% inflation or more. Again, and I'm talking about U.S. active support for genocide in one place. We've got the specter of, or potential for, escalating to nuclear war with Russia over the issue in Ukraine, which we've done everything possible to extend rather than de-escalate. Already, 54 billion that have been sent over there, almost as much as the entire annual military budget in Russia. So it is quite dramatic. And let's see, I think there's also the issue with Lithuania trying to block stuff coming in and out of Kaliningrad and sanctions. And one thing I want to make a point, because it doesn't get talked about enough, but I think, again, it definitely worth repeating. When people talk about the idea of sanctions and the idea of sanctions as an alternative to war, sanctions are not an alternative to war. Sanctions are an act of war. Sanctions kill. Okay, and typically the people that they kill are the most vulnerable in a country, the poorest, the ones who have the least access to good quality, safe, food, water, medicine, and everything else. That's who gets whose circumstances are really harmed through sanctions. It's not the leadership. Trust me, throughout the 90s, when we had these sanctions on Iraq and the no-fly zone, and Madeleine Albright talked about how it was worth it for 500,000 children to die due to these sanctions. Saddam Hussein wasn't missing meals then. Okay, he was still doing all right. As a Cuban American, we've had the embargo on Cuba for more than half a century. Fidel Castro lived his entire reign of power pretty much with the embargo in place. Trust me, he never missed a meal. There were a lot of Cubans who suffered, and real hardship, health-wise, not being able to access foods and dying from preventable diseases, and all of this. The effect that it has is not on those people who are in power that you're trying to punish allegedly, but you do punish a lot of people. And so one of those things where I think it's really needs to be clear that sanctions are not an alternative to war. So in really any sense. And so that again, that's sort of being brought to my attention by the issue with Lithuania and Kaliningrad, as sanctions beginning to, I don't know exactly when it'd be taking effect, but again, affecting another area, which is going to then again escalate what is already a bad situation with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So yes, sanctions, tax on the poorest in the target country, and sanctions also, by the way, don't help. Sanctions and tariffs, they also harm the people in the countries that put them on, because now they're not, again, this to a much lesser degree, to be certain, they're not the primary victims there. But even then, it's you and I, when we put sanctions on a certain country or tariffs on a certain country to try to punish them, what in reality we're doing is we're punishing our own consumers because we're not allowing them to get the goods that they would otherwise be able to get from these places and these people. So we're at 30 minutes. I'm going to wrap it up, guys. As there was a question earlier about helping the campaign. Look, guys, as I say a lot of the time, one of the biggest things that we need, like Justin Amash told me when I asked what it was we needed to learn from the old two parties, it really is just a difference in resources. So, guys, if you can, please come on over to, let me see if I'm on the right side here, Misigoy.com over here on the lower right, or lower left of the screen, excuse me. Go over there, big old donate button in the corner. We need a little bit of resources to be able to get on. We have a number of political events coming up over the next few months. We'd like to be able to attend, reach out, expand our reach to get out and connect with other voters, people outside of our sort of libertarian bubble, so that they understand not only is there an alternative, but they understand the difference in that alternative, that it's not just more of the same or somebody else who's going to, become part of the system, but something radically different when we're talking about the anti-war message, the freedom message, freedom to choose the kind of money you're going to use so that we can escape this kind of the inflation that we're dealing with from this central bank mismanagement of the monetary policy, everything from top to bottom, and the simple morality of not wanting to continue supporting genocide, things like that. So there's a real stark difference here, and we've got to reach people to be able to bring that, and that takes a little bit of resources, more than what we've got right now. So please, if you can, help us out there. You can also obviously be going around and spreading the message as well. And thank you to everybody sitting here watching live or who watches later. Please make sure you make some time for that. And that's it, man. I'll talk to you guys next week, if not any other time sooner. Thank you.